we don't have a foot roll system to worry about. So let's go ahead and get to it. What we'll do is enter into setup mode. Let's make sure we move to our inverse kinematics tab. We'll go ahead and grab the shoulder, forearm, and wrist joints. Sweet, so with all three selected, we'll go in and apply our dual to the planar system. Let's go ahead and choose OK. There's the IK goal. Sweet. Let's exit setup mode to see what happens. You can see how it's going to kind of flip the wrist. No worries. We know how to fix this, right? Let's enter back into setup mode. We'll select our wrist. And now it's just a matter of zeroing out its transforms. So now this is the new default position. When we exit setup mode, all is well. Cool. All right, so we can go ahead and test out our first control, and we will use this as a control object. Again, we don't have a foot roll system here to worry about. Remember, when we set up the feet, we set up a series of locators to pivot the feet a certain way. Now this brings up an interesting point. Could you do the same thing for a hand rake? Well, you actually can. What if you wanted to create a hand roll? Now that's for a more advanced course, but that just gives you an idea as to how you can take this a step further. Alright, sweet. So once we have this in place, this would be a good time to rename this object. Since it will be a control, we'll give it a prefix of enum, and then that will be L arm. Nice. From there, what I'd like to do is enter into setup mode. I'd like to go ahead and parent this to the global control. And then I'd like to essentially zero out its transforms. Let's go ahead and search for the control object underneath the global node. So with it and only it selected, we'll zero it. Exit setup mode, all is well. Sweet. From there, let's say we jump to our display tab so we can give it a different shape. Let's go ahead and work with box here. This is the same shape we've been using for the legs. We'll go ahead and do the same thing for the arms. We'll uncheck solid. At this point, I'd like to go to style and set that to replace. Let's go ahead and bring down the size. So we'll go ahead and link our channels and just drop this down so it wraps around the wrist. Cool. I'm using about 186. I might go ahead and change that to 180. 180 millimeters, that is. Just to make sure it's not so large. And now we have a value that we can match for the control on the opposite side. Alright, cool. Once that has been done, we know that we can then go in and recolor this object. So we'll go ahead and use blue here. Sweet. I won't add it to its group, but we know how to do that already, so let's make sure that that step gets done. What I will do now, though, is go in and create the elbow control. So let's do this. We'll expand our arm control. Remember, that's where we find the IK solver. Feel free to rename it. That's L_arm as our suffix. And with it selected, again, in setup mode, we'll choose create IK up vector. Nice. And then from there, what we could do is basically move it back a bit more. So let's go ahead and grab the up vector object. If you're having trouble selecting it, remember you can always select one of your arm joints and press the F key. From there, you'll find the IK root group. Sweet. And there's the IK up vector. Now let's make sure our drop action is set to match. And we'll just go ahead and drop that on top of the elbow. Sweet. So once we've done that, we can then go ahead and translate it back locally. And remember, we do this so that when the arm starts to move closer to this vector, it doesn't flip out immediately. Alright, sweet. So that's going to work out well. If anything, we can move this up. But as long as we do this in the X and Y plane, remember we have to stay along this plane or the angle of the arm. I think this will work out very well here. So now what we can do is work on kind of cleaning up this shape. Let's do this. We'll exit setup mode just to make sure all is well. We'll start to move our control. Cool. And then once we've done that, it's just a matter of heading over to channels. Let's go ahead and find rotation. And we're going to go ahead and delete our rotation list that has all of these values just to reset the orientation. All right, cool. So once we've done that, we can then head over to display, locator shapes, custom. Feel free to kind of drop the size of this a little bit more so it's easier to differentiate between the elbow and arm controls. You might also change the display. Those are just a few options you have. But I'm going to go ahead and work with box. I'll uncheck solid. And then from there, I'll start to bring down the size of this. So it's a little bit smaller than the arm control. Let's say to about 130. So I'm going to link these. It's going to be 130 millimeters. Sweet. Once we've managed to do that, we'll make sure style is set to replace. And then we can recolor the object. 3D items, draw options. Let's go ahead and set this to blue. Alright, cool stuff. In no time at all, we've managed to create our elbow control. Now, remember, we should make sure this is a part of our global node, right? So let's take care of that step. We'll enter into setup mode. And with just the control selected, we'll parent to the global control. Once we've done that, let's go ahead and jump to properties. Let's make sure only the up vector is selected. We'll zero it out. Let's also give it a new name. That's going to be NML elbow. All right, super cool stuff. So now we can exit setup mode, take a look, nothing shifts, and we can start to test our control. And there we have it. So that's working out great. And then we can work on the right arm the same way. Let's go ahead and get started on that. The steps are essentially going to be the same. So at some point I'll just go ahead and stop and leave the rest up to you, just to avoid repetition. Let's say we enter into setup mode. We'll go ahead and select our 3 arm joints. We're ready to apply inverse kinematics. Sweet. From there, let's go ahead and select the wrist. Let's go ahead and zero out its transforms. We can now go ahead and exit setup mode. Take a look, all is well, so no need to unparent this chain. And then at this point, it's just a matter of setting everything else up. The control objects, making sure that we mirror the elbow control, and we know how to do that already. We would create a temporary locator, and then we can go ahead and match its position here. And then underneath setup, we can make sure we use mirror X to mirror that across, and then it's just a matter of aligning the position of our control to that mirrored locator in setup mode. Alright, super cool stuff. So again, I'm going to leave the rest up to you since the steps are essentially the same. And in the following lesson, we'll go ahead and finish out the arm controls by making sure the wrists get constrained. And then our last step, essentially, we'll go ahead and create locators that we will match to the position and orientation of each wrist joint. And then once that has happened, we'll then go ahead and constrain the wrists and then parent those locators to the arm controls. So let's say we go ahead and get started. What I'll do is go ahead and create a locator, hitting the L key. Let's head over to our items viewport. And we'll start with the left wrist. Let's go ahead and make sure our drop action is set to match, and we'll just drop that on top of the wrist joint. Sweet, so once we have done that, then it's just a matter of renaming this object. That's going to be LOCDRV L wrist. And there we have it. Let's go ahead and duplicate it. And we'll match this to the right wrist. Alright, cool. Let's get this renamed. So instead of L, that'll be R, and we'll get rid of the 2 at the end of the name. Fantastic. Alright, let's go ahead and enter into setup mode. We'll start by constraining the wrists, and then we'll go ahead and parent these locators to their respective controls. So starting with the left wrist, we'll first go ahead and grab the wrist joint. Now let's go ahead and control click the locator that will drive it. We'll head over to modifiers and we'll apply a rotation constraint. Let's exit setup mode just to make sure all is well. Great. Now back in setup mode, we'll make sure to take our locator and parent to our arm control. And now, when we exit setup mode, take a look. We have full control over the orientation of the wrist. So now what we can do with this is animate, let's say, a hand plant, where the arm will stay put as we animate the rest of the body. Fantastic. All right, let's go ahead and undo back to bring the control back to the neutral position. And then at this point, we can do the same thing for the right side. So I'll go ahead and pause the video and do that on my end. Alrighty, so the wrist joint has been constrained and the locator parented. So now when we exit setup mode and we start to move our control around, all is well. Let's go ahead and start rotating the control object. Fantastic. What I'll do here is use reset to bring it back to the neutral position. I'll go ahead and choose reset all. Fantastic stuff. Let's not forget to store these locators in the hidden group. So if you need to, go ahead and grab your arm control and press the down arrow to move down in the hierarchy to get to the locator. And then at that point, you can go to Groups, find the hidden group, control click it, right click and choose Add Items. We'll need to do that once more for the locator on the left wrist. So we'll go ahead and pick walk down. With it selected, we'll grab our hidden group, right click and choose Add Items. So that's all there is to that. So guess what? We only have essentially one more area to rig, and that would be the hands. Once that's done, we'll then do some cleanup work, right? We'll make sure that we hide items that animators should not see. We'll also want to lock our model down so that by the end of this, the only thing the animator can select is the control objects that they'll need to animate. Alright, sweet. So that's it for this lesson. Root controls that will allow animators to drive the orientation of each finger by simply rotating at the control. But then we can create custom channels to drive the other sections, and that'll keep things very efficient. So that's an option we can most certainly take, and I think it'll work out well here. So let's go ahead and get started. What we'll do is create a locator. We'll press the L key. And then from there, let's say we go ahead and use a drop action to match this locator to our index finger. So we'll start there. What I'll do is go ahead and drop this on top of the second joint. The reason why is because this is primarily what we would rotate, and then we would create offsets with the metacarpal bone. So that's the route we will take here. We'll make sure to create custom properties to drive the axes that we'll need on these root joints. What I'd like to do next is go ahead and rename this object. That's going to be enum L index. Alright, sweet. Then we can go ahead and change its display. Let's say we work with a sphere this time. So I'll go ahead and switch shape to sphere. We'll uncheck solid. We'll switch style to replace. By using sphere, this will give us a good idea of the joint's orientation as we animate the finger. Let's drop the radius quite a bit so it wraps around the section. We also need to consider the other controls we'll add. So we want to make sure that it's at a decent size so it won't get in the way when we select other controls. So we could always set the value to about, let's say, 24 millimeters, and I think we'd be good to go. Alright, sweet. So from there, what I'd like to do next is actually go in and create custom channels. And the great thing about this is when we duplicate the object, those custom channels will also be a part of the node that gets duplicated. So that'll help us save a bit of time. All right, let's go ahead and get to it. We'll head over to User Channels, Add User Channel. The first one is going to be meta underscore pitch. So we'll use this to control the pitch axis of the metacarpal bone. We won't give this a min or max limit. We will make sure to set both values to 0. That way animators can push this however they'd like. So this looks good. Let's go ahead and choose OK. Fantastic. We'll go back and add another channel, and this one is going to be meta sway. All right, fantastic. Let's go ahead and choose OK. And now just two more for the mid and end sections. So go back and choose Add User Channel. We'll name this next one mid, and the last one is going to be end. All right, sweet. So now we can go ahead and duplicate this object, and again we'll use a drop action to match this to the next joint. Let's duplicate again, Control D. Let's add that to the next. We'll duplicate again, add this one to the pinky. Now we'll duplicate and use this one for the thumb. Keep in mind that this is actually going to go to the thumb's root. That's fine. So knowing that, we can get rid of the first two channels here. So we'll just go ahead and right click on the channel and choose delete at the very bottom. Cool. So once we've managed to do this, this would be a good time to rename these controls. So let's go ahead and get to it. This one's going to be anim thumb, anim pinky, ring. So you get the idea. I'll pause the video and do that on my end. So once we have our controls renamed, what I'd like to do next is maybe increase the size of the thumb control so it wraps around the section a bit more. That way it's easier to select. So we'll head over to Display. We'll go to our radius and increase this just a bit more. Maybe to about, let's say, 60. All right, sweet. So that looks lovely. All right, nice. Now, let's say we go ahead and take these controls and recolor them. We'll then go ahead and bring them over to the right hand just to save a bit of time. So we'll go through and choose a color of blue. And then once we've managed to recolor the object, we'll then go ahead and take the control and align it to the bone on the opposite side. So for the thumb, remember we got rid of a few channels on that control, right? So we'll just go ahead and duplicate this object, and we'll use a drop action to align it to the right thumb. Once we've done this, we'll then want to recolor this. So that'll be yellow. And then we'll want to rename it. So that's going to be NMR thumb. So you get the idea. I'll go ahead and let you take care of the other controls, and that's going to be it for this lesson. So in the following lesson, we'll basically finish left hand because the steps will be exactly the same on the right side. So our next step is going to be to parent our finger controls to the arm control. Let's go ahead and grab them all. And then we'll shift select the arm control. Let's enter into setup mode. We'll press the P key. Once they have been parented, let's now deselect the arm control by control clicking it. And then we'll go to 0 and we'll choose all. All right, fantastic. Now here's an issue. When we grab the arm control and we start to translate, you'll notice that the finger controls will separate. So visually this creates confusion. No worries, we can get around this by simply constraining the position of our controls to the joints that we will eventually drive. So yes, we can do that. Let's go ahead and get to it. We'll grab the control first, and then we'll shift select the joint we'd like to position constraint to. Underneath modifiers, we'll apply the position constraint. So watch this. When we now select our control and we start to translate that away, you'll see that the control will stay put. It will no longer separate. Nice. So let's go ahead and do that for the other finger controls. Again, we'll grab the control first, we'll grab the joint we'd like to position constrain to, and we'll apply the constraint. I'll pause the video and take care of the other controls. Sweet, so all of these controls have now been constrained. When we grab our arm control, we'll start to translate to test this out. Everything's working very well. Now, how do we drive the orientation of our joints? Well, this time we need to work with a rotation constraint, right? So we'll go ahead and select the joint first now, and then we'll grab our control and we'll apply the rotation constraint. So when we now exit setup mode and we start to test this out, as we start to rotate, you can see how the fingers will now follow the orientation of the control object. Super cool. Let's enter into setup mode and we'll take care of the other fingers. So again, this time we're grabbing the joint first, and then the control, and then we'll rotation constrain. Let's do that for the other fingers. Again, I'll go ahead and pause the video and do this on my end. Alrighty, so now that our joints have been constrained, it's time to test this out. Let's exit setup mode and we'll add some rotation. So we'll grab our control and we'll start to rotate. Cool stuff. So this is all coming together very well. Things are looking great. So our last step is basically to control the other sections of each finger. Now, yes, we can work with the channel lengths tool, but let me go ahead and show you another way. We can work with an expression. And this is really straightforward. We'll get to work with our workspace here in our setup viewport. Cool stuff. So we'll go to add, and we'll add an expression. So here's the expression operator. Great. Now what we need to do is go ahead and add the channels that we'd like to tie into this operator. Let's start with the thumb control. So we'll go ahead and select it. From there, let's search for our mid channel. So we'll go ahead and scroll down until we find our custom channel. And we'll go ahead and add that into the workspace. Sweet. The next thing we'll add is the channel that we need to control. So let's go ahead and grab the mid joint. We'll grab the rotate tool. Let's make sure we're not in world or local mode so we know exactly the axis we need to tie in. And clearly that's the Z axis, right? So let's go ahead and search for that. Here it is. Again, it's best to add this from the channels viewport. It's just very clean and we add what we need and nothing more. By the way, if you ever wanted to add more to this, you can see how we just see the rotate Z here, but you can add more by simply dragging the next channel in. So we'll have a look at that when we set up the metacarpal joint. So take a look at the expression operator. Let's go and have a close look. We'll go to our properties viewport. Here's the equation that it starts with, A plus B. And then the output of that will get plugged into the rotate Z here. So you can change this to whatever you like. In this case, we don't even need channel B, so let's go ahead and get rid of that. We'll get rid of the add operator and B, so we're just left with A. And now it's just a matter of taking mid, and we'll wire into A, and then A is going to get wired into the rotate Z channel. Now when we do this and we test this out, let's go ahead and grab our thumb control. We'll go to user channels and we'll start to use the mid channel. So we are actually driving that value now. Let's go ahead and select our thumb. Underneath properties, we'll go to locator, and you can see that the value is updating and we have connected into this channel, but you don't quite see the change just yet. Now if this ever happens to you, it doesn't always happen, but if it does, all you have to do is reopen the scene. I'll go ahead and zero out the channel there. So when you essentially reopen the scene, it's going to kind of refresh the system. So what I'll do is go ahead and pause the video. I'll go ahead and open this back up, and when we have a look at this again, you'll notice that everything is going to work perfectly. Alrighty, so back to our scene. If we were to go ahead and start using our mid channel, you'll notice that everything's working just fine. So again, that doesn't always happen, but if it does, it's a really simple solution. So take a look, we're driving that joint now. How exciting. Alright, I'll go ahead and zero this out, and that's basically what we have to do to kind of finish up. We know that we should also make sure that our controls get stored in their groups. So let's make sure we don't forget about that step. And something else I'd like to show you is how to go about tying the metacarpals to this system as well. So again, what we need is an expression operator. We can go ahead and add another one. Let's go ahead and move this over to the side. Then once we've done that, we'll go in and grab our control. With the control selected, let's head over to channels and we'll search for our custom channels. Remember, all the way at the bottom. So there's meta pitch and meta sway. Let's go ahead and control click them both and add them to our workspace. Alright, sweet. So there are our channels. Nice. So now it's time to go in and grab the joint. Take a look. When we grab our rotate tool, we know that it's going to be the Z-axis as well as the Y-axis that we'll need to control here. So we'll go ahead and search for those two axes. Let's go ahead and scroll. And here they are. There's the Y, there's the Z. So we'll go ahead and add them to our workspace. Let's go ahead and move this over. Now take a look. You can see how the rotate list is collapsed, but once we expand this by clicking on the arrow to drop this down, there are our two channels. So you can see it's not going to add another operator to the workspace. It's just going to add to the node. So that's really straightforward. Whenever we need to add a channel from the same object, it will just be added here. All right, so now it's just a matter of taking a look at our expression. Let's go ahead and have a look. I'll go to the properties viewport. And again here, we can go ahead and get rid of A, or excuse me, the B and the plus operator. So we can go ahead and tie into A. And now we can go ahead and take meta pitch. And let's wire that into A. And we know that A should be wired into the rotate Z. Super cool. So at this point, we'd want to repeat the process. We'd want to create another expression. Let's go to move this up. We'll go ahead and search for meta sway. There it is. And we'll plug that into our A channel. You can see I've plugged that into B. I'll just go ahead and delete that link after we have selected it. All right, there we go. So go ahead and connect that back, but this time into the A port. You can connect into B. All you'd have to do is change your expression, of course, but it's easier to plug into A because it just makes sense since that is the first port, right? All right, sweet. So once we've done that, we can then go ahead and take our output and wire that into the rotate Y. And there you have it. So that's all we have to do to finish up our work here. So what I'll do is go ahead and stop the lesson, and I'll leave the rest up to you since it's really straightforward. And in the following lesson, we'll just do some cleanup work. We just have to hide items that animators should not see, and we'll also want to lock our model so that by the end of this, it's fairly clear that we should just go through and select our controls, and that's what we should use to drive our model. So let's go ahead and take care of this last step for the cool stuff. I really enjoy how straightforward Modo makes expressions. It's really neat stuff. Now here's what we'll do. We'll start to hide items animators should not see. We'll also want to lock our model so that by the end of this, we can only select our controls. Let's go ahead and get to it. We'll jump to our groups viewport, and from there, we can start by hiding the skeleton. We'll right click and we'll choose members visible. We'll set that to off. Take a look at how clean things are starting to look. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for the hidden group. So with that selected, we'll right click and we'll choose members visible. We'll set that to off. Nice. Looks like we have an extra joint here that we can add to the skeleton group. So I'll just go ahead and deselect the hidden group. Let's control click our skeleton group. We'll right click and we'll choose add items. Nice. So at this point, what we can do is use the / hotkey on the number pad to hide our wireframe, and then we can jump up to our mesh group. I renamed it to locked just so that it's clear that all items stored in this group are locked. So feel free to keep it at mesh or rename it to locked, whatever is easier for you, but either way, we want to lock this down. Let's right click and choose member selectable. and we'll set this to off, and we're good to go. So now we cannot grab our geometry, we can only go in and grab our controls. Neato. So that's it for our work here. We learned some really neat rigging concepts in Modo. We learned how to not only go through and create an animator-friendly control rig, but we learned how to keep it efficient so that animators would enjoy using the control rig. And remember, this is just the foundation, so I challenge you to take what you've learned here and build from that foundation to create a more advanced rig, something that you might use for a more advanced character in your production. But that's it for this lesson.